putting in 30 hours a week for 3 weeks or so, I would expect that will give you the lift from, say, a 157 to a 170 plus. This is Alina, and she's looking to go from a 157 to a 170 and above in the next 3 weeks. My name is Steve Schwartz, and I've been teaching the LSAT for the past 20 years. Today, Alina is going to bring me her biggest LSAT challenges, and I'm going to help her address them as she looks to improve by 13, 15 points and more. So tell me, where are you scoring right now?
Okay, so right now, the lowest I've scored 2 weeks ago, I scored a 150, which was like a significantly big drop from regularly scoring like before that 155. And then I was like typically within that range. And then like the highest I got to was 157.
Okay.
And like that's where I felt like I had like the most potential to grow from. So that's like a pretty big jump in between like scores and stuff. So it's like I was very much like confused as to like what really is like a predictive model of like where I'm at right now, and I would try to sit down and like actually mimic test taking like environment and everything, so like making sure that it was actually accurate. So I just didn't understand exactly what it would look like as to like where I was. I've been studying for like quite a while. I started 7 Sage this past June. They have like a foundations model where you like learn the LSAT, and I took a very long time slowly trying to learn it to make sure I really understood the exam, and I finished that around January. And then since then I have just been drilling nonstop, and I haven't really been taking that many practice tests because like everyone would always tell me not to like run through your practice tests because like you're never going to. So I've just been sticking to using the ones that's like 101 through like 110 or 111, and just been using those, just nonstop drilling it. And then I was planning on just then taking the practice test, but like now it's like I was literally afraid of like taking the practice test and it's like not showing all the work I've been putting in.
So you thought, then you got that 150 result and you're like, what's going on? I thought I was doing better. I've got to radically change my approach. And so that's when you joined LSAT Unplugged, and you're looking to level up your prep with the coaching, with the classes, with the more personalized study plan. And your other results have been more in the high 150s, like the 157, like you said. And what's your ultimate goal for your test day? What do you want to ultimately score?
My ultimate goal at 170, I just didn't know how possible that would be within where I was starting, because I am taking the April LSAT. I do want to take an LSAT. I want it to be my last LSAT, but I am also prepared to take one LSAT after this if I don't get my score that I want. But my like goal is to be like just higher than what I'm currently at, and so like that's like where I'm at right now.
Got it. Okay.
Right. So I always figured I would just keep taking it until I was getting a 170, because I was like, I'm not walking away without it. So that's just where I'm at right now.
Okay, so you really want that 170. At certain moments, you're like, I'll just take whatever I can get that's better than where I am, but you really do want that 170 in just the next couple weeks.
Yes.
Okay. And so when you look at the time you could put in over the next few weeks, how many hours on average could you do per day or per week?
So on average, because my LSAT's 1 month away, in my mind and in my schedule, have dedicated like as much time as I need to for my LSAT. So as of now, I thought I could dedicate around 4 to 6 hours a day, and then on the weekends, make it more closer to 6 on the weekends. And I'm like absolutely prepared not to have any study breaks in terms of like days off. And so that would look like between 28 up hours a week that I can like dedicate toward the LSAT. Right.
Okay. So you're willing to put in whatever it takes. You're willing to put in 5 hours a day on weekdays, maybe a bit more on weekends. So we're looking at even 30, 35 hours a week. Full-time study. Of course, we don't want you to burn out. So we're going to see how can we keep your momentum going while maintaining quality of life at the same time. Burnout is real, and it can destroy your LSAT score. The last thing you want is to be sick of the LSAT the week before the test at the point where you're like, you know what? I just want to be done with this already. Whatever I get is what I get. The way to avoid that is to moderate your energy level and limit how much time you study for, especially if you have the leisure to do nothing but study for the LSAT 6 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's okay if you want to grind full time, especially if your test date's coming up soon, but be strategic in how you schedule out that time. When Alina shared with me that she was willing and able to put in 5-6 hours a day, 7 days a week, and she also recognized that she wants to divide her LSAT study time over the course of the day, I knew that she had a massive opportunity to improve her score because, number one, she has the time, and number two, she has the discipline to manage her schedule, take control of her time, and to avoid studying in massive blocks, which is a recipe for burnout. You want to make sure that your study time is productive, not just long, and shorter focused of deep work are going to beat grinding for hours every single time. If you have the leisure to study for the LSAT full-time with no other obligations, I do recommend a few hours in the morning, break for lunch, another few hours, and that's your day. This allows you to still maintain sleep, diet, exercise, relaxation. You could still see friends, you could still eat well, and you've also knocked out a good 5-6 hours, which is probably the most that you could reasonably do in any given day anyway, because the LSAT is not a test you can cram for. It's a skills-based test, and it takes time to let those patterns sink in.
I figured it's like I had like a pretty good schedule where it's like, because when I was like talking to one of my friends who was trying to figure out how to like study for herself, she was like, I can't get myself to sit down for 4 straight hours. And I was like, I don't know many people who can, and like I don't. So like in the morning, 2-hour block, in the afternoon, 2-hour block, and at night, 2-hour block.
Hey, real quick guys, if you're just getting started with your LSAT prep or you're looking for a quick refresher, you can grab your free easy LSAT cheat sheet linked below this video. It's jam-packed full of concrete actionable tactics you can take and apply to your LSAT prep right away for a quick score boost, and again, it's 100% free. Grab your copy below. And now back to the show. So you mentioned that you spent a lot of time just watching foundational videos and drilling questions, but then you're measuring yourself with timed exams, right? So there's a massive disconnect there, right? Like drilling questions is not the same as dealing with a time constraint, which is also not the same as dealing with the endurance factor.
When I first was doing the practices and everything, I was doing it untimed. So then I would do like 10 questions at a time drilling, and I would do great on those questions. And then I realized that it's like when I was actually sitting down and doing the 26 questions back to back, and just like now that I have been doing like a section every single day, I feel like I'm getting better at stamina, of being able to push through, but it's still like I can feel it. It's like I can see when my attention starts to drop.
Right. Okay, so good. So you're recognizing stamina is an issue here. How many full practice tests would you say you've done up to this point in total?
I think 3.
3.
I think like sat down like diagnostics, like 3. But then in terms of sections, done like a lot of different sections of exams, but I know I sat down for like 3 full diagnostics before.
So 3 full diagnostics, 3 sittings with the endurance factor of 4 sections. Now, ballpark with the timed sections, has it been like 10 timed sections or 50 timed sections or somewhere in the middle? Just ballparking it.
So thus far, 10. I started doing the time sections at the beginning of March. So okay. It's like, it's been like, I've been trying every day to do a section. So I think like maybe around 10.
Too many students avoid taking full practice tests for far too long. This is one of the biggest LSAT prep mistakes that I see. But the thing is, drilling questions in isolation doesn't build your endurance, and your test scores are not going to improve if you're not measuring them under real timed conditions. Even if you got to 100% accuracy when drilling by type, that wouldn't mean anything because it's not enough to get the questions right. You've got to get them right under test day conditions, which means not just focusing on accuracy, but also working on your pacing and endurance. As test day approaches, especially in that final month, I typically recommend taking a timed exam minimum once a week, reviewing it in depth, and maybe doing some individual timed sections on the side to work on your pacing. You can't avoid taking practice tests forever, and it's okay to get low scores on your first practice tests as long as you allow the space and the time to do more tests to work on endurance and improve over time as you get better at simulating test day conditions. But the last thing you want is to be fatigued on section 4 and see a drop in your performance just because it's section 4. And the only way to avoid this is through practice and exposure. So timing's only a very recent focus of yours.
Timing started becoming more of a focus like a month or 2 ago. I have test accommodations because I have like pretty bad test anxiety. So that's what I started doing like a few months ago. And now it's like, I know like I only have this much time and I don't like freak out. So it has been like a longer period of me trying to get timing in. I think more of like the stamina, I've like been doing it for a long time.
So you're where it's an issue, you're giving it more of a focus now at least. And so what we're going to probably talk about more is adding more timed work into the mix, more full exams exams into the mix, especially since you have the luxury to be able to be a full-time student who is studying for the LSAT specifically, which is great. I generally divide LSAT prep into 3 major phases: accuracy, pacing, and endurance. A lot of students will either focus too much on accuracy, working on foundational material, drilling questions by type. Other students do nothing but full-length timed exams, focusing on endurance and measuring themselves. What gets left out is that sweet spot in the middle, focusing on pacing, because time management is a unique skill. It's not just a function of your intelligence, and you've got to make sure that you have enough time for the harder questions on the test that truly need it. You don't want to be running out of time with less than your average amount of time allotted per question when you get to the hardest questions. The way to avoid this is to speed up on the easier ones so that you have more time on the tougher questions later. Generally speaking, I recommend spending roughly 10 minutes per question for the first 10 questions in logical reasoning, 10 in 10, building up a time bank that you could then apply for the tougher questions later that will need more than your average allotted amount of time. On these easy ones, trust your gut, don't second guess yourself. If you think something's the answer, it probably is, and besides, you need that time for the tougher questions later. It's more valuable there rather than just double checking and triple checking everything. Now, aside from the endurance factor and the timing factor and test anxiety, when it comes to the content of the test, are there any specific particular weak areas that you have with either within logical reasoning or reading comp, for example?
After I take a practice, I immediately write down the ones that I'm like consistently missing. And I noticed that on my recent one yesterday, because like I started your schedule that you sent yesterday, I noticed that it was like necessary assumption questions, it's like link assumption questions and weakening questions, that those 3 I tend to like miss the most. I put a lot of focus trying to get myself to work on method of reasoning questions, or it's like parallel flaw. It's like where it's like you look at it and you see the flaw and you have to then match it, find the same thing in like another one. That type of question, I know it's not that often. Typically there's only one in every section, but those, no matter, I don't know how to even like break those down. I've been like looking at them nonstop, watching all the videos, and I like for some reason just cannot get myself to like actually find the right answer. It's like when they're explaining it, I see it, but if that was more frequent on the LSAT, I would be in a very like scary position, because it's like I have such a hard time with that kind of question. But besides that, it's mainly like necessary assumption questions and link assumptions, and then occasionally it'll be like value judgment and strengthening questions I sometimes have trouble with too.
That's a really solid breakdown. To your point there, I mean, parallel flaws, you might hate them. If there's only 1 or 2 per section, then probably not worth spending a ton of time on that, at least until you've mastered the more common types like necessary assumption and sufficient assumption. Necessary assumption in particular is one of the most common question types. And so mastering that's going to give you a much bigger lift than focusing on something that hardly ever comes up or doesn't come up that often. When Alina told me that she's having trouble with necessary assumption questions as well as sufficient assumption questions, I knew she had a massive opportunity to improve her score just by drilling these 2 particular question types, because necessary assumption questions, along with flaw and inference, are one of the biggest types of questions in logical reasoning, meaning they're one of the most common. And so if she can level up her understanding of these question types, she's going to see an immediate significant boost in her score, especially because logical reasoning is 2/3 of the test. So any gains that she makes in her understanding of necessary assumption will carry across both sections. And of course, I'm never going to say to leave points on the table. If she's having trouble with parallel flaw, she should of course work on this as well, but until she's mastered necessary assumption, there's no reason to spend time on less common types that are not going to yield as significant a boost, especially when she has pretty limited time before test day. Now, as for the question, how do you distinguish between necessary assumption and sufficient assumption? It's simple. It's based on the key word or phrase in the question stem. Necessary assumption questions contain words and phrases synonymous with necessity, like depends upon, requires, and assumes, while sufficient assumption questions contain words and phrases synonymous with sufficiency, like allows, enables, follows logically if assumed, and properly inferred if assumed. And far too many students fail to distinguish between these 2 types, leading them to get both types wrong. So getting crystal clear on what the question's asking you to do is the first and most important step. Now, you mentioned the review process when you were booking this call, talking about maybe you need to review better. What does your review process currently look like?
I just started trying to implement like the Socratic method because I always felt like my review method wasn't that great. It would simply be I saw what question I got wrong and then I would watch a video and I'd be like, okay, I got it. You just see it and you're like, oh, that's where. And then like I would X out the video and then continue to move on and then go get another question the same type wrong and then be like flabbergasted through my like 5-minute review that somehow I did not like absorb anything. That was typically my like review method. I would just try to quickly get through it. I think it's because it's like I would typically do my review right after I did the like exam, which I didn't think was like probably the best way because it's like you're just tired now after taking it, disappointed by whatever score, and now you have to also sit through a 2-hour review is not ideal. Now it's like I stop after the exam, go grab something to eat, and then sit down and then like look through and like, I don't know, think of it more positively. Like, okay, I get it wrong this time, I'm not going to get it wrong next time. I feel like it's a lot better, like of a motivation to sit down and go through the lengthy review.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, the fact that you are able to study full time means you could take a test in the morning, have lunch, then review it, but it's not all in the same sitting. You're not getting a blood clot from sitting there for 5 hours straight, to your point. So yeah, I think that's a good way to go about it. If you're aiming for a 170 or above and you're not documenting your review process, you're leaving a ton of points on the table and making it that much harder to achieve that top score. In part because even if you're not doing it, your competition is, and imagine who has the benefit. One student has the clarity about why they're getting things wrong and what they can do differently the next time around, and by forcing themselves to articulate their thought process, they're getting crystal clear on exactly which tricks and traps they're falling for. Contrast that with another student who's just looking at the answer key and thinking to themselves, oh, I get it now. How could I have been so dumb? And then they're moving on to the next. When you have a structured wrong answer journal where you lay out why the wrong answer seemed right and why the right answer seemed wrong and the patterns you notice across your mistakes, you're that much more likely to avoid making the same mistake again. You can't rush through your review process. You can't leave those key lessons and insights on the table. But when you write things down, you force yourself to get clarity on why you're missing things to make sure that you're learning from your mistakes and you can avoid making them again the next time around. When it comes to dealing with the time constraint or the endurance, do you find that you're ever overthinking things and getting bogged down? Are you rushing sometimes? What do you feel is your tendency with the timing?
I've noticed that it's like some questions when I'm reviewing, I've noticed that I didn't read the stimulus clearly, or like I've jumped over words in like an effort to try to go faster, or like I've noticed that I have to reread a lot. And I know that's like really bad because it's like you're just wasting time there, or like the first pass trying to go fast, not reading it, you're wasting time. You need to go back and actually understand it, or else you're just not going to get the question right. And sometimes when I miss a question, it's like I did not read the correct answer choice correctly. Like I just did not understand it almost when I first read it. And I noticed that the questions I typically like get wrong the most are usually in the last part of the section, which are like the hardest questions. It's like consistently I get those wrong, and I notice that when I'm like going review, I didn't even think of the answer choice that's correct as even like a possibility. I didn't even think of it, see the connection as like how that's even related. I feel like there's a difference between seeing the correct answer choice and the wrong answer choice, and seeing the correct answer choice and seeing it as like a possibility, versus like not even seeing it as a possibility, and like that's like a bigger jump of even having to like then now create that connection.
Okay, so it's good that you're aware of that. I mean, the first step of solving a problem is knowing that you have one and figuring out what it is. So we're noting here that fully understanding the stimulus is an issue, and then also properly considering all of the answer choices through that lens of the question type, making sure that you're giving each one due consideration given what they're asking you to do. And then of course, we want to make sure that you have enough time for those harder questions later in the section that truly need that time. So let's talk about, adjustments to your program going forward, given what you've shared here. I do have some thoughts and recommendations based on what you shared. So first thing, we've got to get you doing more timed work overall. The time for foundational videos and drilling like you were doing before, that time is past because you have less than 1 month till test day, and you've only taken 3 timed exams so far. And so I'm going to want you doing a timed exam at least twice a week, reviewing that timed exam in depth later that same day, possibly spilling over into the following day as well. On the day, so that could be, say, a Monday and a Thursday, or a Tuesday and a Friday, or if you want to do one on the weekend, this is just your life 7 days a week till test day, that's fine too, but space them apart, don't do them on consecutive days. Next big thing is more timed sections, because you mentioned you've only done 10 timed sections total since the beginning of the month, roughly 2.5 weeks ago. So given that, I would suggest on the days that you're not doing full exams, do individual timed sections. Do at least 2 timed sections per day on the days you're not doing full length exams, because we got to work on your pacing. The timed exams will help with endurance. Doing 2 timed sections back to back will help with your pacing and also help with your endurance a little bit as well. In that final month before test day, taking real full exams under test day conditions is non-negotiable. You cannot avoid taking full tests and expect to improve on your pacing and your endurance. And on top of that, if she is to review those tests thoroughly using the Socratic review method, she's going to see some significant gains because she has barely done any full exams up to this point. And then on top of that, on the non-test days, she does 2 timed exams a day for 5 days a week. She is doubling, tripling, quadrupling the volume of timed work that she has done. She's going to see a massive improvement in her pacing, in her time management, and in her ability to take full exams without getting fatigued. And so for her to get those 10, 15, 20 points in the next month or so, it's going to come from these exams under timed conditions and engaging in that deeper review process first and foremost. And I'm excited to see where she takes this.
Now that I'm going to start doing 2 exams a week, okay, so do I start with like the later exams, or do I start with like the newest exams?
We budget them out so that you're going to end up covering all of the newest ones. Let's say we have roughly 3 weeks till the test. You're doing 2 exams a week. That's 6 exams in total as full sittings. On top of that, you're also going to do several individual sections as well. You might be able to do 6 full exams, and then also on top of that, 6 more exams worth of material done as individual sections. That's 12 exams total. We're up to exam 158 in the numbering system, and so to subtract 12 from that, we're back to say 146. And so these are all ballpark estimates, but the idea being you're going to do 146, 147, 148, all the way up culminating with 158 2 days prior to your test.
If I'm starting like this week of like actually grinding, what kind of jumps am I expected to see to make sure that I'm on like a right track?
That's a great question. The thing I'll say is with such a limited time window, giving progress benchmarks wouldn't be that meaningful because it's so compressed. And progress on the LSAT, it's not linear. It can come in fits and spurts. So I'm not going to say that you're going to improve, say 3 points a week for the next 3 weeks or anything quite that specific. What I will say though is that when you take everything all the recommendations I share with you during this call today, all of that put together, putting in 30 hours a week for 3 weeks or so, I would expect that will give you the lift from say a 157 to a 170 plus, provided that you do all of this. So that's going to include the 2 exams a week. It's going to include 2 timed sections on all those other 5 days of the week. In addition, you're going to do some foundational work on necessary assumption questions on the side, as well as distinguishing them from sufficient assumption, or as you call them, linking conditions, right? So I'm mentioning these 2 types specifically because necessary assumption is one of the most common question types. That's a high yield area. With only 3 weeks, I'm not going to say to spend a ton of time on parallel flaw like you mentioned, just because it's rare. Nail down necessary assumption first, nail down your pacing, nail down your endurance. And then in the last week, if you want to do a little bit of parallel flaw or weekend, you could do that.
What can I do when I'm reading a passage and I'm at the 3rd paragraph and like I'm just lost and I'm like time's ticking and I'm like I don't even know what the main point is anymore because it seems like it's jumped like 9 times. What do I do there?
So the first step is to not get to the 3rd paragraph without knowing what it's saying by pausing after the 1st paragraph or pausing even after the 1st sentence. You're reading with anticipation, meaning that as you take each sentence, you're thinking to yourself, what are they setting up for me here? What is the role of any given statement? Like in logical reasoning, you have role of statement. In reading comp, you have different functions of different sentences. So one sentence might be setting something up. One sentence might be providing a counter example or a counter premise. One sentence, hopefully, was going to be your thesis statement summarizing what's the main idea or what's the author's opinion. So I'd be reading with structure in mind, looking to see what role does each piece play. And so even by paragraph 1, hopefully they've given you the main idea there. But if they haven't, at least you recognize by the beginning of paragraph 2 that paragraph 1 was nothing more than background information setting the stage. LSAT reading comp passages are deliberately written to be as boring as possible. Even the law ones, even the humanity ones, there's no guarantee that you're going to like them. And so if you're not finding it interesting, if you're getting bored, if you're falling asleep, you've got to fake it till you make it. Manufacture curiosity, feign interest, act as if what you're reading is the most fascinating thing in the world and you can't wait to hear more about it. And you can also read with structure in mind, looking at each sentence, each paragraph, and asking yourself, what role does this play in the passage as a whole? Are they just setting the stage and giving you background information? Are they presenting one viewpoint only to counter it with another one a little bit later? And most importantly, what is the key phrase or key sentence where the author expresses their opinion, their central idea, their main point? If they could leave you with only one key concept and remove everything else, what would that key concept be? That is the main idea. Hold on to that for dear life because a lot of the questions will refer to that and that alone, and that becomes your building block or foundation from which to solve the rest of the passage's questions. In reading comp, spend some time there. I'm not saying to neglect it, but because logical reasoning is 2/3 of the test, and you've mentioned issues there, I would spend at least 2/3 of your time there because any gains you make will be doubled across those two sections. So again, highest yield to start your next action steps would be more logical reasoning with the necessary assumption and distinguishing it from sufficient assumption. That's the biggest question type recommendation I'd give you in LR. The other big thing I'll say is, can you find ways to work on your pacing by speeding up on the easier questions in logical reasoning, the first 10 or so, knocking those out in less than your average allotted time. What were your specific time accommodations?
I have time and a half. I get 52 minutes per section.
In that case, for you, I would say aim to knock out the first 10 questions in roughly 15 minutes, a minute and a half per question, so that you have more time for the tougher ones later. If you had standard timing, I would have said just a minute a question, but with a time and a half, maybe you could do 15 minutes for those 10. Then regardless, either way, you end up with that extra time for the tougher ones later, where you need to slow down a bit more to fully capture the meaning of the stimulus.
I have been trying to not use a full 2 minutes because it's about 2 minutes per question that you get, and not use a full 2 minutes for those first beginning, because I know every time I look over, it's the first 15 I always get right, and then it's after that it's and it's really sad, and I just get scared that it's if I lessen the amount of go less than 2 minutes, that I'm risking those questions that I do know how to do it and get them right. So how do you know when to just leave? Do I just take the plunge and just continuously move on and trust my initial instinct, or do I just kind of stay to make sure?
So this is partially a matter of self-control and pacing. So we have to exercise the willpower to say to ourselves, this is a relatively easier question. I'm going to go with my gut. If it's question 5, there's no crazy tricks there. It is as straightforward as it seems. If you think to yourself, it can't possibly be that easy on a number 5, it can. And if you're typically scoring in the high 150s, that means that your fundamentals are solid enough that you should probably go with your gut, just pick it and move on. I also would never time individual questions, because some of them you're going to have a prediction. That prediction is solid. You could knock it out in less than a minute. But others later in the section might require 3.5 minutes in some cases, especially if it's your least favorite topic or least favorite kind of wording or least favorite question type. And so you borrow time from the earlier portions of the section to save it for the later portions that truly need it. So ballpark, that means you're having a minute and a half per question on those first 10, or for 15 minutes total for the first 10. But again, go with your gut, pick it, move on. You're not going to make it more right. And double checking and triple checking there could actually cost you something later. And this is what you're going to work on with your pacing. You've only done 10 sections timed. You've only done 3 exams timed. We're going to be tripling at least all of that over the next few weeks. And so you're going to get into your rhythm as you do this a lot more.
Absolutely. Okay. I'm excited.
The other thing I want to make sure that we don't leave off here is on the review process, because you've just joined the program. You haven't really done any of the spreadsheets or trackers yet. So I'm going to recommend that you start documenting your review. You'll have plenty of chances to do that because you're going to be doing a lot of questions coming up. And so we want to stay organized. I typically recommend using a spreadsheet like an Excel or a Google Sheet where you have separate columns for different elements of the question analysis. That's going to involve, you're looking at the stimulus, the question stem, the answer choices. For the stimulus, maybe you're paraphrasing it, or for reading comp, you're paraphrasing the main idea. For the question type, you're just noting what type it is so you can see potential trends. Like you mentioned, you're already aware. Necessary assumption, big area for you to focus on. That's a high yield area for you. Then we have looking at the answer choices. You want to note, what did you choose and what was the right answer, assuming they were different. For the tempting wrong answer, what made it tempting as one column. Separately, what makes it wrong. For the right answer, what made it seem unappealing at first glance and what ultimately makes it correct. And if you weren't even considering the wrong answer, like you mentioned earlier, that's also something to note. You're going to have a separate column as well with your key takeaways and insights that you can refer back to frequently before you take your next practice test. So start doing all of this. This will take more time than you've been doing for your review up to this point, but you have the time in your schedule to go all the way with it. And that's a massive point of leverage that you have, especially relative to other students who are working full time or they're balancing LSAT with classes. So I'm going to encourage you, go all the way with this.
I'll find the time.
Okay, cool. Good to know. But you're clearly committed and you're willing to put it in and make this the number one priority. The other stuff is going to be on the back burner for a little while.
Yeah.
So take this all the way. Look at the lessons in the course where we cover the review process. Before we sign off, what would you say is the biggest insight you got from our call today?
I think the biggest insight for me is like the schedule of like knowing what to do next in terms of like structure. Because I feel like when you're kind of free flowing and starting by yourself, you don't really know if the way that you're doing it right now is correct and you don't know exactly what to target or like what method of targeting it will get you to home run. So knowing that it's like, okay, if I do 2 practice tests like a week, that is like normal, or like that will like help with pacing. Like that is the correct strategy to fix that issue. And doing like 2 timed sections a day, that will also help with all these other areas that I'm like falling short in. I guess it's like there's a problem and each person has a problem, and like knowing a direct solution.
Exactly. Well, I'm glad you feel like you have that concrete plan of attack. So I'm going to encourage you to implement it, make the most of the time that you have. Alina only joined the program less than a week ago, but I'm excited to see how quickly she's picking up the concepts and her curiosity and willingness to change up her approach going forward. I feel like based on what she shared, she was previously kind of free floating with her study, randomly doing this or that without any clear plan of attack. But now she's got a structure. And once we talked about what she has done up to this point, and more importantly, what she hasn't done, it felt pretty obvious to me that she's got to spend a lot more time taking full-timed exams, full individual sections to work on her pacing, and reviewing everything in depth, tracking her mistakes. I know it'll take a lot of work for her, but luckily she has the time available in her schedule and she's clearly dedicated to making the most of it. Most importantly, structure beats randomness. If she follows this new system that we've laid out for her here, I'm confident she'll finally break that 160 mark and push her way into the 170s over the next few weeks.